So, Sunday nights we do the Bible discussion class, and tonight we got into talking about wisdom, and that led us into talking about like having conversations with people where we call each other out for certain things, or whether or not we have the right to call each other out for certain things. And so that led to a discussion on empathy and being willing to base conversations on this desire to understand each other rather than desire to change each other's minds. And I think what's so difficult to grasp is this concept of not needing to prove what you believe is right to be right to someone else. I know that's what I wrestle with all the time in terms of, I'm a more progressive person now in the way that I think, like politically and socially, but I didn't used to be that way. And a lot of the people that I grew up with aren't that way. A lot of the people that I love very much now are not necessarily that way. And having conversations about that, like even having conversations about like where you stand politically gets charged immediately because it's just such a heavy topic. But then when you get into, the way that you have the conversation, I think what is hardest to grasp for me as someone who's such a passionate person for justice and equality is that until you walk with another person and try to understand where they're coming from, until you're willing to ask for a better understanding of that person's perspective, there is literally no right within you as a person to try to change their mind, because you haven't reached out in that way. You haven't created a space that is safe for them to express who they are and help you understand where they're coming from in the first place. The hardest part about empathy, and I'm an empathetic person, I'm a very empathetic person, but the hardest thing about empathy is acknowledging that there are experiences that you cannot fully understand without actually walking with a person in that experience or hearing their story. And I think from the perspective of someone who has been walked with, from the perspective of someone who claims membership in certain communities, whether it's a church community or, a religious community in general, not just a church community, like Christianity as a whole, or, being a Midwestern person, being a woman, having a certain sexual orientation, having a certain, I guess, political point of view, although I think that's less of a community and more of a cult sometimes. Having all of those labels, having all of those life experiences, some things that can be changed, some things that can't be changed based on living differently. With all of those things in mind, when you approach a conversation, if you are not a part of a community, it's so difficult to just understand what that person in a community or what those groups of people within a community are going through. And so a huge part of empathy is seeking that understanding. And that was a big part of the conversation that we are having tonight, is how do you approach those conversations? I think a huge thing is tone, because vocabulary is limited. There are certain cultural contexts and understandings to certain words. There are certain stigmas to certain words that just aren't going to go away based on, reading a dictionary. But tone is a lot easier to explain. Tone is a lot easier to interpret if it is taken with caution and taken with empathy in mind. And so a huge part of having the conversations like we did tonight is saying, even if you don't have experience in an area, saying, I want to understand. Help me understand. Like enabling that conversation to be one of respect and love, as opposed to attempting to change someone's mind about something. That's so hard. Even for someone like me who I dedicate a good portion of every day to thinking about this type of empathy and discourse. That's just how my brain works. I'm constantly seeking that sort of connection with people. And I recognize that that's not how everyone functions. And so even that is choosing another form of empathy, which is, trying to come at it from a different way of thinking altogether, like logical thinking versus emotional thinking. Somewhere in between those two is where you find the meeting of the minds. And it's possible. I think it's beautiful when you can find that. But it's so difficult to get there. And so much of the journey of being an empathetic person or seeking to be an empathetic person is just trying to find what that even means. And then once you find what it means, how do you implement it? Because every person's going to be different. And yeah, it's hard, but that doesn't make it not worth it, to use double negatives. That's what's on my mind. That's a heavy one. Sorry about it, but not really. In my pursuit of being the most compassionate and merciful and grace-filled person, how do I navigate daily conversations? Especially if I do have an understanding of where someone's coming from, but have moved from that place to another place. How do I go back to that other place and sit with those people to gain a better relationship, to gain a better conversation, and to ultimately build those bridges? Because I'm of the full belief that that's the goal, is to build those bridges. That's what empathy is seeking a bridge. I don't think everyone thinks that way. And maybe that's the first step, is figuring out why we can't all think that way. I don't know. Maybe I'm off track there, but it's what's in my head. And it's a thing that's very important to me. And I don't know how to condense that, so this is just a long video. Again, sorry about it, but not really. Empathy is a big deal. We could all use a lot more of it.